few housekeeping notes. Number one, please ensure that all mobile phones, pages or devices that go beep are turned off during presentations. We'd also like to acknowledge our sponsors, our conference sponsors, Epic Games, Autodesk, the State Government of Victoria, Firemint, Big Ant Studios, Tantalus, Big World, Academy of Interactive Entertainment, Image Metrics, Havoc, Blue Tongue, THQ Studio Australia, Sony and Microsoft. Special thanks go out to Autodesk for their kind and generous sponsorship of last night's awards dinner. Without further ado, I would like to bring to the podium our keynote speaker. Justin Halliday is a video game producer and designer with almost 20 years industry experience. During this time, he has worked as a designer and producer, oddly enough, on a number of titles including Shadowrun, True Lies, Crush, Kill and Destroy, Crush, Kill and Destroy 2, Crossfire, Le Mans 24 Hours, Grand Prix Challenge, Transformers, Heroes of the Pacific, AFL 2006, and Lucinda Green's Equestrian Challenge. Justin is currently employed as a producer at Trickstar Games. Make him welcome, please, Justin Halliday.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you guys for coming this morning, getting up early. Basically, we're here today to talk about Heroes Over Europe, which most of you will be familiar with, having come out late this year. As you can see from the opening slide, this isn't probably going to be a normal sort of post-mortem that you get at this sort of thing. So we're going to be talking about what actually happened in the project rather than all the nice things we like to remember about the project. First off, I think Simon has introduced me quite commendably, so we'll skip that bit. But basically the background of Heroes of Europe is the first thing we'll start with. Heroes of Europe is a sequel to Heroes of the Pacific, which is a game that game and IR Gurus, who became Transition Games, released in 2005. Basically the game was done over the course of 21 months, and when it was released in Europe and America by Codemasters and Ubisoft. The game itself came out and it scored a pretty respectable Metacritic score of 77%, and it went on to sell about 700,000 copies worldwide, which is pretty decent for a game, you know, that came from a startup sort of developer at that point, and didn't have a huge marketing push, but obviously it established that there are people out there who want that sort of game. So obviously with that sort of level of success, a sequel was planned. Basically, Heroes of the Pacific and Heroes of Europe, they're published by a company called Red Mile. Red Mile had the sequel rights to Heroes Over Europe after Heroes of the Pacific, so they were involved in the start and most of the process of Heroes Over Europe. So we'll talk about that as we go through. Now, my involvement in Heroes Over Europe is slightly complicated. I was the producer and one of the designers on Heroes of the Pacific, as we said before. But by the time Heroes Over Europe got started, I moved on to other projects, namely AFL and Lucinda Green's Equestrian Challenge. So it wasn't until about 2.5 years into the Heroes Over Europe project that I came back onto it when one of the producers, when the producer who was on it actually left to go back home. And so I came back onto the project at around Alpha. At that stage the game was meant to be finished in about 6 months. But we're not going to talk about that now because we'll get to that when we get to it. Last thing here is, why is this talk possible? Usually, as I say, you know, this talk is pretty blunt about what happened to the project during the course of its development. And usually postmortems are about all the nice things that happened. But today we're talking about the not so nice things that happened. The talk is possible because, well, Transmission Games ceased to exist a few months ago, which is obviously not very good. You know, at its peak it had about 140 staff. When it shut down it had about 80 staff. So that's 80 more people, you know, out there looking for jobs. The publisher Red Mile, they still exist, I'm told. I'm warned that they still exist, so I can't say libelous things about them. Basically, they exist in name only. Basically, some lawyers have it and they collect royalties off the name Red Mile. So, for all intents and purposes, they have no staff and they're gone as well. So, as I say, the Heroes Over Europe is a game that basically killed a company and killed a publisher on the way through. So what we're going to do is we'll start with at the start of Heroes. We're going to go all the way through from the start to the finish. We'll talk about how the project was started, how the development progressed, and where it ended up where it ended. first thing here, pre-production on the game started in January of 2006, which is basically 4 months after Heroes of the Pacific came out and hit the shelf. So they knew that it was relatively successful at that point, and they started on pre-production on the new game. Heroes of the Pacific, as you can see here, the budget was about $3.5 million ultimately. It actually started less than that, but we got some more time, we got some more money to polish the game, and in the end it was $3.5 million. Now, a couple of things here that we're going to be doing through the course of this talk is, A, all of the dollar figures are going to be in US dollars, so you're going to have to convert them yourselves. You know, the Australian dollar fluctuated greatly during the course of the development of the game. You know, after 3.5 years, you know, I think we started at something like 65 cents and we ended up at 95 cents and got killed on the foreign exchange rates as well. The other thing we're going to do is I can't actually mention the budgets for Heroes over Europe, but if anyone here has got a maths, they can work them out. So the next thing we look at here is that Heroes over Europe, the first budget was 45% higher than the Heroes of the Pacific final budget. So does anyone here know maths and can work out a rough budget for me for the first one? Come on, help me out, brothers. Anyone? Someone? 5? Instead of 5, okay, we'll start with 5 for help. We'll see where it goes. The planned release at this stage was in March, Q1 2008. It was meant to be a 24-month development, which is only 3 months longer than Heroes of the Pacific. Okay, so the goals of the project were relatively straightforward, but quite ambitious at the same time. It was Xbox and PS3 first off. They didn't want to do PC SKU. There's marginal kind of sales in PC, but it was added later. The goals for the mission were 26 missions, 20 multiplayer missions plus co-op as well. So that's a significant increase over Heroes of the Pacific. Heroes of the Pacific had 26 missions, no multiplayer missions, no co-op play, although it did have split screen. The game wanted to have 40 aircraft, improved enemy AI, flight physics, a variety of gameplay, which I mentioned here, dogfighting, torpedo and dive bombing. It also wanted to really expand on the multiplayer area. Basically, you know, we recognised at the end of Heroes that the multiplayer side was something that players really were gravitating towards, and there was a focus here on improving the multiplayer experience for players. And that included things like a better lobby system, buddy listing clans, also ranking and leaderboards. All these are things that you have to do in your TRCs now. But beyond that, there was also this team play where players could create their own squadrons and have their friends flying as their wingmen in it. Maybe you're flying as their wingman, I can't remember. Anyway, so the idea was really to expand on the multiplayer connectivity and experience there. And the expectations, though, were also very ambitious. There was a whole new internal next-gen game engine being developed in conjunction with the game. It hadn't started at the start of pre-production, it started along with that. There was an all-new terrain mission building tool called GCAT, which is Game Content Authoring Tool. We also had, you know, the usual next-gen graphics and performance. We had the same number of single-player missions as Heroes of the Pacific, but 20 more multiplayer missions plus co-op play, which complicates things. We had increased terrain and object detail. So on Next Gen, everyone expected more detail out of the graphics, more stuff everywhere. We had a slightly increased timeline over Heroes, so only 3 months longer. And finally, the budget increase, as we saw, was only 45% higher. I think you can see at this point that the foundation was laid pretty early on for the game not being able to achieve all of these things with the budget and the timeline that was planned. The actual development at the start of the project, the development team went into it with this, with what I call a blue sky attitude. Basically, they were going to use Heroes over Europe as a chance to do everything right this time. They weren't going to cut any corners like Heroes 1 had cut. Like, you know, Heroes 1 was done kind of by a small team. It started with 5 people and it expanded